So, I'm Gabby from Grosso's GSA, and our first question we have for you is, tell us about your new book, Queer There and Everywhere.
That's a great first question. Thank you, Gabby. And thanks so much for having me. Thank you so much, Jessica, for setting all of this up, and I'm so excited to meet you guys. So the book, Queer There and Everywhere, 23 People Who Changed the World, is about 23 queer people who changed the world. It comes out next week. This is pretty much the only place where you are able to get it in advance of its publication date. So you guys will be receiving the first signed copies anywhere in the country. This book is about the story of LGBTQ history, and it tells that story through the stories of these individuals who are from the 200s through the 2000s. So it covers a lot of time and a lot of different queer identities.
Hi. What first inspired you to write the book?
Well, there wasn't anything like it out there, and I thought there should be, because this is the book that I would have really liked to read when I was a young adult. I believe that queer history for me, it gave me so much, including a sense of community. But I know that not everyone is just going to read a bunch of academic stuff like I did, so making it fun and using a casual tone to talk to teens in a way that people of any age would want to read, where it's just a story about a person and they're a full person who has a dating life and makes mistakes and all of this stuff, instead of just the big accomplishments that they might be known for in history later on.
Hello, I'm
Hi.
Trinity from
Hi,
the
Trinity.
Fitch GSA. And about how long did it take you to write the book?
Well, HarperCollins came to me, and they only gave me a matter of months to research and write the entire thing. The manuscript was done after 7 months after they first reached out to me. But we kept editing it, copy editors and all of that, for months after that. But I was pregnant throughout writing the book, and I was very sick with my pregnancy, so a lot of the writing was just, I would write a little bit more, morning sickness, write a little bit more. It was rough.
Sounds like it.
And but so it was fast. It was fast. But now my book baby is being born. I have a 7-month-old at home. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jack of the Fitch GSA,
Hi.
and I wanted to ask you, what is your definition of the phrase "change the world"?
To me, that means that you made an impact that affected people outside of your immediate community, maybe. So one of the people in here invented the computer. That changed the world. That's an easy one. But then there are the smaller ones, like the first person to do a high five is in here. That also had an impact, but maybe not in the same way as the computer. And so most of them made an impact on our greater world, but many people in there are activists who made a big impact on the LGBT world specifically. So they're activists who started the movement that we're still in today. So I would say just made an impact that makes the world a different place than it was before their life.
How did you come across these people?
I started learning about them when I was researching them for my app, Quist, and I guess just books. I might Google somebody and come across their Wikipedia page and couldn't use that as a source, but could then find that name and go find a book about them and get to learn a lot more. There are some great websites about LGBT history out there. Outhistory.org is one. And I would say I just started Googling LGBT history and came across people as how I originally came across them years ago.
Was it hard to research these figures due to like straight washing and cis washing?
Absolutely. It was really hard because you do need to read between the lines on a lot of this. It was hard to find them, first because the sexuality and gender about people in history is not often talked about, whether they were straight or not. And then also because there's less books on LGBT-specific content than mainstream content out there. What I did was, I emailed professors and went around different ways like that when there weren't published books, but really you have to find out from somewhere like outhistory.org that this person is part of LGBT history, and then you go to the more general books about them and find that one paragraph that you wouldn't have known to look for in anyone else's biography unless you knew you were looking for it.
So what was the most interesting thing you learned while researching these people?
The most interesting thing, I will have to say one interesting thing. I don't know what I could say is most interesting, but I think a lot of people don't know about the anti-cross-dressing laws in this country that existed in dozens of cities across the country. And one of my favorite creative protests is the one by Jose Soria in San Francisco, where someone assigned male at birth wasn't allowed to wear a dress or another article of women's clothing, or a certain number of pieces of clothing. And so this person, who was a drag queen, he and the other drag queens dressed as women, but what they did was wore a little button that says, "I am a boy." And that way, there was no intent to deceive, which is what the law was against, and the police didn't arrest them that night that they wore those buttons. So I think that was an interesting way to get around that one.
So do you have any connections with the people that you wrote about, like people that you admire in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very connected to all 23 of these people now that I've gotten to know their lives so intimately. I don't have personal connections as, met any of the living ones or things like that, but I did really feel a connection with Eleanor Roosevelt when I was researching her chapter. I really admire what a quiet kind of strength she had, and we ended up naming our daughter Eleanor just recently after writing that chapter.
Quite a connection.
Yeah. Yeah, so now I'm very connected to her.
Who is your favorite person in the book?
I could never choose a favorite person in the book, but if I had to, it would probably be Sylvia Rivera. Sylvia was one of the people who was at the Stonewall riots that in 1969 that was a major watershed moment in the queer rights movement, and Sylvia did not have a quiet strength like Eleanor. She had a loud strength, and I really admired that about her too. Sylvia just kept going no matter what, and was such a tireless advocate for trans and queer rights despite all of the discrimination she faced within the LGBT community for being trans. And she did so much to help. She helped to feed and give homes to trans youth who were on the streets in New York and things like that. So I just admire her so much, everything she did.
So obviously there's more than 23 queer people in history. So how did you decide who to choose?
It was so hard. I had a list of about 100 possibilities. Obviously there are more than 100 queer people in history too. What ended up determining who was in there was the quality of the sources to be able to make a successful chapter, to be able to say, and then they said this exact thing because we know that from an eyewitness, or this anecdote because it was in their diary, or so we needed enough things written about them to be able to create a full chapter to tell that story. And then, of course, diversity in a lot of different realms was the other important thing in choosing the balance of these 23 people. So there are people from different parts of the trans spectrum and the LGBT spectrum. There's almost half of the people in the book are people of color, and they are from several different countries, and then they change the world in a lot of different ways. Some are famous for being queer, some happen to be queer, some led countries, and some were, some didn't lead countries, I guess I'm trying to say, in like a, change the world in smaller ways than leading a country.
So obviously you did say that it was rather difficult finding research because of such a small amount and all the straight washing and such. But on that note, what is your opinion on schools not teaching LGBT history, and do you think that we can change that?
I think we can. The most encouraging thing on that front right now is a new law in California where public schools are now required to teach LGBT inclusive history. And I hope that that law will become a model for other states, maybe Connecticut, and then we can, go from there. But without it being mandated, there's, of course, a lot that teachers can do. And I think for now, it's on teachers to be the ones to make sure that this is incorporated, and they're often already teaching about LGBT people, like, say, Oscar Wilde in an English class. Just mentioning that Oscar Wilde is part of the LGBT community has a huge impact on the LGBT students who now know they have this role model, and the non-LGBT students who start to understand what a huge impact queer people have had on the world, and that they've always been a part of this world. So I think it's extremely important that we do teach it in schools, and I think students can help their teachers by bringing them this information, bringing them this book or the Quist app. We have a part of the website of activities for how to use it in schools, but then also at quistapp.com, there's a whole list of online resources of just different interactive ways to learn LGBT history. And October is LGBT History Month in the US, so that's always a great excuse to learn some.
So there are a lot of people through our history who are influential LGBT people. Like you said, Eleanor Roosevelt, which, by the way, I was like completely unaware that she was even on this, like on the spectrum. So very interesting to hear.
Yeah.
But if you had to pick 3 people to be the most like influential people who were also LGBT in history, who would those 3 people be?
Well, first I'll say that, when we're interchangeably using LGBT and queer, and that the terms LGB and T are relatively recent. So when we go further back in history, we can't really retroactively apply and these labels to say someone from the 200s was gay. They couldn't have self-identified that way. The whole ideas around gender and sexuality were completely different in their time and place. So I guess when I'm saying LGBT people from history, I just want to be clear that these are people who exhibited same-sex loving or crossing gender boundaries or these more broad ideas of queerness than necessarily the exact definitions of LGBT that we have today. But that being said, probably the most influential in this book is Abraham Lincoln. Outside, to choose 2 more, it's incredible. There's few people that you...
Yeah, I'm already surprised that you said Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, Alexander the Great often comes up as one. There's, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, all those guys.
I was hoping that you said Da Vinci. Da Vinci's a really big hero of mine, so I was...
Yeah, again, it's how you define it. For me, for some of those people, I mention their names because they were once accused of sodomy, and we don't necessarily know, or they wrote once about loving this one person of the same sex, but for the rest of their life, they were with people of the opposite sex. So, but I think that we shouldn't assume that they're heterosexual and cisgender just because there's this much about them being possibly LGBT. That should be counted as much as this much about them possibly being heterosexual or cisgender. And we shouldn't make the assumption like, oh, well, of course that person was heterosexual and cisgender. There's no way we'll just discount that one time that they loved someone of the same sex. If you love someone of the same sex, then you should be discussed as part of queer history. So honestly, the more I look into queer history, it's hard to name 3 influential people from history who were not LGBT. But those are a few of the biggest names that are out there.
What were your thoughts when choosing the title of your book?
It was really hard to choose a title. We ended up on this one because this book is a pop culture kind of take on history. It's that kind of fun. It's a for fun book, not a for school book. And so using a play on a song title from pop culture seemed right. I'm happy that we used the word queer, especially because of what I said of LGBT doesn't necessarily apply to many of the people in the book, but the broad idea of queer in some way, of not entirely heterosexual or not entirely cisgender, does apply. And yeah, so that's how.
What are your takeaways after writing this book, and what do you hope other people will take away?
My takeaway after writing this book is to not write a book while pregnant. What I hope other people take away is I I think people will be very surprised by many of the people in here, like Eleanor Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln, but I think they'll also be surprised to learn about how diverse and fluid gender and sexuality has been through all of time. And I hope that the queer youth that read it are able to find a person that they can really relate to, because when I was coming out as a teen, getting to know people from queer history is really how I found my sense of community, and getting to know people through their stories in books that weren't necessarily written for teens, but finding that one paragraph and things like that. Yeah, I hope that they take away that they're just not a fad, and they're part of something amazing and a huge family that goes back all of human history, and that they can be really proud of what their ancestors have achieved.
So I know you kind of just mentioned this, but it's relevant. So are you part of the LGBT community?
I am. I have been out as lesbian since I was 14. I am married to Liz, my wife, and we have been for, I just realized last week, it's going to be 6 years next month. And yeah, I'm very proud to be part of the LGBTQ community, and it's been a wonderful part of my life to have that family. Wherever I go, you just find the rainbow and you walk in there, and yeah.
So how did you become interested in the historical aspect of the queer community?
I got to choose a topic for a history class in high school, and so I looked into LGBT history. That paper ended up being on the persecution of homosexuals in World War II, and the men who wore the pink triangle in the concentration camps. My school library actually had more than one book about the pink triangle. And it was so emotional and such a connection to read about those people. That's what got me started on looking into more of our stories from the past.
What did you do in college that led you to become an author?
Well, I was a Spanish major, naturally. My degree's in Hispanic language and literatures from Boston University. In college, I did a ton of internships and volunteering that involved activism. So one summer I spent in Bulgaria working for the only LGBT rights organization in the country, me and the 3 staff people for the country. It is now a defunct organization. When I was living in Boston for college, I was an intern with Mass Equality, where we were working on defending marriage equality when Massachusetts was the only state in the country that had marriage equality. And I was president of the LGBTQ student group at my college. So those kinds of things, more than the academics, is really what led me on this path. But so I would encourage people to, whatever their major, that you can pursue your interests regardless, because I would have majored in LGBT studies, which now exists at some colleges, if it had existed.
Why don't we know about a lot of these people?
That's a question I usually ask students like you. Why do you think we don't know? But I won't put you on the spot. You've used the words straight washing and cis washing, and history is told not only from a straight and cis perspective, but a white perspective, a male perspective, a Christian perspective, etc. And the phrase goes that history is told by the victors. And so I think once we begin thinking critically and we look at what we learned in history class in elementary school or high school, we can start to understand how our history, American history, was not taught to us by the perspective of Native Americans. There's a Columbus Day, like, that says it all. So I think that we are not taught because we are not the victors, I guess. But it is easily remedied because there's GLSEN has a curriculum out there for teaching LGBT history. The It Gets Better project is putting out a study guide for teachers to use this book. And so I think we need to actively work against and always question what perspective we're telling history from.
So what has been your inspiration to be active in the community?
It's all about the generation after me, like it was for activists in the book. I am able to live safely and openly today because of the work of people like Sylvia Rivera. And I feel that I owe it to the next generation, especially being a mom now. I want to make the world a better place. And if not for me, then for the next. But hopefully for me too.
So I believe that you mentioned this before, but could you elaborate a little more on your app? I believe it's called Quist.
Yeah. Quist, which is kind of short for queer history, is where the name comes from. Quist came out in 2013, and it's a free mobile app for phones and tablets, both Apple and Android, and also Windows. And the way that it works is you see what happened today in LGBT history. So it might be today in LGBT history, Massachusetts passed marriage equality or something like that. You would see May 17th, 2004, that happened. Or if you open it up May 17th, you could also see what happened May 17th, 1801. And so the things are from all over the world, and you can choose to get a little daily alert for one of them, but there's at least one for every day of the year, but most days have multiple things that happened. And my favorite thing is how when you swipe through what happened on that day, a lot of times it might work out that, you know, you'll see this terrible thing happened, an execution or something like that happened hundreds of years ago on this day, and then there's a coming out of, say, Ellen DeGeneres or something in more recent history, and you can just see every year on every day how things have been getting better. Yeah.
How has your life changed for the LGBTQ plus community since you were a teenager?
So much. On marriage, which is something that has moved really, really fast, no state in the U.S. had legal same-sex marriage when I was in high school, which is really incredible to think about, because it really wasn't that long ago that I was in high school. Massachusetts passed it when I was a senior, and it has just been breakneck speed compared to any other social movement since then. I feel like national marriage equality already just feels like super normal, and that's not that old. But of course, there are so many LGBT issues out there besides marriage equality, but for that one, it has stood out to me as a really clear way that you can see change has happened since I was a teenager. But I think every year it's becoming something that we talk about more and more. We're becoming more visible every year. There were no queer people on TV when I was in high school. That, like, the representation, people like Laverne Cox, is changing now.
What are your plans for after the book comes out?
Well, it comes out Tuesday. Tuesday, my plan is to go to the book launch event at RJ Julia's in Madison. I am going to be doing events in New York and Boston and DC and Baltimore for the book, and talking at high schools, colleges, LGBT summer camps, places like that the rest of the year. And I'll be staying home with Eleanor and continuing to spread the word of queer history as a speaker and writer long after this book's big release. I'll still be talking about it.
What advice do you have for teens that are struggling with their sexual or gender identity?
To reach out. There are so many resources available today that even if you don't want to go in person to a GSA meeting, there's the Trevor Project that you can call. There are lines that you can text if you don't want to call. There are websites you can look at if you don't want to have interaction with anybody. There's Tumblr. There's all kinds of places where, for me, I think the most important thing is the sense of community that when you can talk to another queer person, or at least read something that another queer person wrote, or something, or watch another queer person on YouTube or something like that, that makes the most difference for me, someone who can really understand. And so I would encourage them that with whatever part they're struggling about, just search for that, whether it be YouTube or Google, and because there are other people who have felt the same way, and resources that have been developed around it.
So this is our last question. Are there any passages in the book that you would like to share with us?
Sure. How much time would you say we have? 5 minutes? I would be... So we can't do a full person's story in 5 minutes, although they're not a ton longer than 5 minutes. But I would just like to read to you our reprinting of some of the letters between Eleanor Roosevelt and Lorena Hickok. Just so that you know what I'm talking about. And, again, I'm not putting any LGBT label on Eleanor, but then, you read these passages and it begins to make sense why you would include her in this book. So Lorena Hickok was a journalist who was originally assigned to cover the would-be First Lady on FDR's presidential campaign. She ended up having to quit her job at the AP for not being able to be objective on her subject anymore. And the nature of their relationship is unknown because I wasn't in their relationship, but these are some of the letters between them, or lines from them. So Eleanor to Lorena, March 9th, 1933. My pictures are nearly all up, and I have you in my sitting room where I can look at you most of my waking hours. I can't kiss you, so I kiss your picture good night and good morning. January 22nd, 1934, Lorena to Eleanor. Dearest, it was a lovely weekend. I shall have to think about it for a long, long time. Each time we have together that way brings us closer, doesn't it? January 27th, 1934, Eleanor to Lorena. Gee, what I wouldn't give to talk to you and hear you now, oh dear one. It is all the little things, tones in your voice, the feel of your hair, gestures. These are the things I think about and long for. April 19th, 1934, Lorena to Eleanor. Oh, damn it, I wish I could be there when you feel as you did Sunday night and take you in my arms and hold you close. Well, I'll try to make you happy every minute while I'm there in May. May 2nd, 1935, Eleanor to Lorena. I know I've got to stick. I know I'll never make an open break and never tell FDR how I feel.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
Hi, my name's Barbara Althen, and I'm here from PFLAG of Southeastern Connecticut. PFLAG was originally named Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And clearly, you know, we've opened our umbrella to include transgender. And so the letters are still there, and I want to make sure everyone knows that we include everyone. We're a support group. We also do education and advocacy. And we meet once a month at the Noank Baptist Church, which is a welcoming and affirming congregation right over the hill. And one of the very most important things that we do is help LGBT and questioning folks develop a sense of community. We want people, their families, allies to come and know that they're going to meet other people who have gone through the coming out process in some way, and they know they don't have to go through it alone. We say that we're in the business of putting ourselves out of business, and we have a relatively small group, usually less than 20 people at our meetings. We start the meetings with a potluck supper at 6, and at 7 o'clock we go around and introduce ourselves quickly, and if someone has an issue that needs to be addressed, we talk about it, and we actually consider support the very most important part of what we do. So if somebody comes in and says, I just found out my kid is trans and I am like in an alternate universe right now. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I'm confused. I think my kid hates me, you know, whatever. There are a million things. A different story from every person. Every single person, their stories, their own unique thing. And we take people where they are and hug them and support them and do whatever we can and feed them tons of information and connect them to people who can help them and encourage them to come back and be a part of our community so that they know when they have questions, they know that they can pick up the phone or shoot out an email and that there's somebody who's going to be there who's going to say, we know what that's like to have been in that place, and even though we're not there any longer, we'll help you along, and that's really the main thing that we do. First of all, support, education, advocacy. On the back table, on the far wall, we brought a sampling of our booklets, our business cards, question and answer sheets. I answer the PFLAG Southeastern Connecticut email, so if you have questions, grab a business card. The email's on there. Shoot me an email. I mean, this is like a regular part of what we do. Come to one of our meetings. You know, come to the first meeting. Don't worry about bringing any food. Just come as our guest. Meet everybody. Everyone in the group's been through this process in some form. As a parent, some of our older members who are in their 70s help their kids come out and be happy, healthy kids. when there was no support group, and they said, we're never going to let that happen to anybody again. We always want people to know that if somebody in their family is coming out and you don't know what to do, there are people you can talk to, a place you can go, and there's no such thing as a stupid question, and you can be comfortable. We like to believe we're part of a group of queer organizations, the Alliance for Living, All Souls Church in New London, OutCT, which is a social group out in New London. We want to believe we're part of a handful of organizations in the area that work together. We know we're all connected, so when something happens and we all need to know each other, we're there. We step right up to the plate. And I want to thank Groton Public Library, and I want to thank you for, it's part of building that community that helps everybody. And come to PFLAG. We'd love to have you, even if you're a member of a local Gay Straight Alliance, we'd love to have you come. It says it even on our business cards. So join us. Come once, and then if you don't ever want to come again, you don't have to come again. That's fine. But introduce yourself to us, and then you become a part of our community, and we work together, and that's what it's all about. Thank you.